This was a talk he gave at Wyoming Catholic College. This is their newsletter. Anyone ever heard of Wyoming Catholic College?
Yeah.
It's a good college. I highly recommend it. There's a former student who goes there. Jeff Frederickson. Yep. So, but I encouraged him to go there, and he did. He liked it. He went out and saw it. If you like the outdoors, Wyoming Catholic College is a good choice. And they have I think a 3-week, what do you call it, introductory
Outdoors orientation, isn't it?
an orientation, 3 weeks, yeah. You learn to, if you don't know how to ride a horse, so you have a horse, you ride a horse. You learn to fly fish, mountain climb, and it's geared toward leadership training. So check out their website. It's very good. And you learn to think rightly, like
Can't you have like
Dr.
a rifle there too?
did what?
I heard you can have a rifle there too.
Oh yeah, you go out and hunt and fish and do all kinds of things. Yeah, I visited there about 2 years ago.
Is it?
Right before the students, they were out on their treks or whatever. It was before the classes started.
How remote is it?
How what?
Is it really remote?
It's kind of remote. They're building a new campus, but it's in Lander, Wyoming, and about a 2-minute drive. You're up in the mountains. If you like the mountains, I like the mountains. That's why I was out there. I was catching some trout and doing some backpacking and climbing and things like that. So for a few days, a little vacation. Anyway, we left off with the angels. How did that go? That was not when I came to class. Did that just go on?
It was just kind of glowing when we walked in.
Was it?
No?
It wasn't on like.
I don't think it was on.
We just turned on.
I wonder if next door, can they turn it on?
No, I don't think so. You want it off or on?
I'd like it up. Can you? Well, you can just go up and hold it. I didn't plan to use that today. So,
Yes. Let's see. Go up to the select button or enter button. So it's asking if you want to turn it on.
that's it. Okay. Now it's making noise. We talked about angels. First, we talked about God. We can know God through reason, and we know God through revelation, 3 persons in one God, and that the Son of God became man. We're going to get to that more fully. But then we studied angels. Angels are God's creatures, intellectual substances, but they're pure spirits with intellect and free will. The angels and how some of the angels became demons, became devils. God did not create them that way. It was their own free will that was their ruin, you could say. Their total separation, eternal separation, forever from God. Okay. Well, we're going to return to the human person now. I passed out these to you a couple weeks back. I'd like to take these out because if you look, I want to review the human person, and now today we're going to get into why we're screwed up, okay? Why we have problems. That's it, okay? And it is the result of original sin. That's what we're going to talk about today. Original sin's effects on us. And so, one side it has angels, and that's it. One side angels, Adam and Eve. The other side it's got this little diagram of the human person. That's it. That's it. Okay. So, we're going to look at just to review briefly, the human person. Okay. You have one?
Yeah.
I don't think I have an extra one, so you'll have to just search for yours. Okay.
Do you have an extra?
I asked them out, so I expect you to have them. Okay. You can just listen if you don't have them. Okay. Maybe get one from one of your classmates. But on the front side here, it has our makeup. Okay, the angels are pure spirits. We're not. We're composite creatures. And that's the diagram side of this. Okay, body and soul individuals. Our senses are attracted naturally to pleasure and food, sex, beauty, things like this. You see something beautiful, we're attracted to it. And beauty is kind of a mysterious thing. Philosophers write about beauty. What is beauty and its meaning and things like this. Some really beautiful or handsome girl or guy walks into the room, everyone notices it. Why is that? We're attracted to beauty, and naturally. And we're attracted to good food. And anyway, that's our senses, our 5 bodily senses. And then there's a spiritual part of us, which is the soul. Okay. And these are, you could say, parts of the soul, our makeup. But some of it spills over into the body too, like memory. Okay. Well, they've operated on people and touched certain parts of the brain, and you'll recall certain things. Okay. So that's the body soul working together. We have an imagination. We can image things. We have emotions. Emotions are things that, are spiritual. Okay, we can listen to something or watch something and become emotional, and it affects our bodies too. Anger or joy, okay. Even someone's body temperature may go up. But the 2 main powers of our soul are the intellect and will. Intellect, we have a rational soul. Remember the rational soul? We have a vegetative soul, actually, a sensitive soul, but an intellectual soul. We're like the plants. We can feed ourselves and reproduce, but we have more. We're like the animals in the sense that we can sense things. Okay, dogs can sense danger, and they can sense food, other things. We have an intellectual soul, a rational soul, and that's our intellect, our intellect is attracted toward truth. And our free will is attracted to goodness. And we love what is good. We're naturally attracted to the good. And when God created Adam and Eve, everything here that we see on this little diagram was working together in harmony. Okay? Under the intellect. They had their emotions under control. They had their bodily senses under the control of their intellect. They wouldn't have eaten a whole box of Oreo cookies, Adam and Eve, before the fall, because they would have known that this was not an intelligent thing to do, a rational thing to do. And their free will was much better under the control of their intellect. Well, with Adam and Eve, this is how the human person was created. God created us in His image and likeness. And that means especially the intellect and free will. That's how we image God, through our intellect, a rational intellect. God has an infinite intellect, and he has a will that's all loving. Now, you turn the page over, and on the left-hand side of the diagram, two diagrams actually, you could say, we have the angels. Okay, just to briefly review, the good angels, which is on the top here, they remain faithful to God. They remain in heaven where they see him, they love him, they adore him. And they help us. That's the guardian angels, praying for us, acting as messengers, serving as guardians to protect us, to inspire us, lead us. And the bad angels are the bottom. These are the ones who revolted against God, were cast out of heaven into hell. Remember, did they see God? No. They never saw God. Once we see God, we cannot lose God. Once we're in God's presence, we can never turn away from him. Okay. They were given a test of obedience before they were allowed to see God. Some of them failed that test of obedience, and that test was a final one because their great intelligence, they knew that they were making a decision to separate themselves from God for eternity, forever. So, they were cast out of heaven into hell. They're called devils. They tempt us. God in his providence allows the demons to tempt us, to suggest things to us. And as the scriptures tell us, Lucifer, the devil, is a liar. He's a deceiver. He wants to deceive people. That's how he tempts, suggesting things to us. Now, we come to Adam and Eve, because we have to know who we are as persons in order to understand ourselves. And maybe this is a review for you. Maybe you've covered this in other classes, but maybe not as in depth or whatever. Okay. Adam and Eve, the top part of this little diagram here, it relates how Adam and Eve were created before the sin, that original sin. Okay. They possessed, up on top, okay, sanctifying grace, which is, I put a little line up there to define what sanctifying grace is. Our share in God's own divine life. That's what sanctifying grace is. St. Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 9 to 11. He says, "Do not be deceived, neither the fornicators, nor adulterers, nor sodomites, nor thieves, nor robbers, nor drunkards will inherit the kingdom of heaven." That is what you used to be, but now you have been washed, you have been sanctified. You have been justified. To be sanctified means to be made holy. Sanctifying grace makes us holy. It's God, a share in his life in us. And when God gives us a share in his life, he dwells in us. We're temples of the Holy Spirit as long as we have sanctifying grace in us. As long as we've been baptized and haven't lost sanctifying grace. Because once we receive it, we can lose it. Brianna, do you know how we can lose sanctifying grace? By what? Because what? Deceive? Well, we can't deceive God. We can deceive ourselves. But how do you fall out of a state of grace? Sin. What kind of sin? Mortal sin. Okay, not just any sin. Venial sin, a small, insignificant sin. You could say, God isn't going to take his life from us. But a mortal sin is a sin that is serious in nature. And it's a sin that we knew was serious and we did anyway. A mortal sin is a sin that one commits of a serious nature, and one has sufficient knowledge that it's a serious offense, and full consent of the will. Meaning we freely did it, knowing it was bad to do. And did I use my example of my second graders before with you on sanctifying grace? Did I go through the commandments with them and teach them before they make their first confessions? And I say, okay, you go through the commandments, you tell me if it's a mortal sin or a venial sin. If you steal a quarter from someone, that's a venial sin. If you steal $500 from someone, well, that's serious. That's a mortal sin. In fact, the law even recognizes these distinctions. I'm a former prosecutor. You have, types of crimes you can commit, 2 basic categories.
Felonies
And misdemeanors, okay? Misdemeanors, not too serious, okay? If you steal a piece of candy out of the store, it's a misdemeanor. If you go and rob someone of thousands of dollars, that's a felony. Actually, if you steal over a certain amount, usually, that's a felony. Usually it's over, when I was prosecuting, it was $300, and maybe they raised it by now. I don't know, I haven't looked recently. So anyway, another question I asked the kids, okay, if you get in your argument with your brother or sister watching a video game and you push them, mortal sin or venial sin? They figure it out. Venial sin. Okay, if you get in an argument with someone, you take a baseball bat and you smack them over the head and crack their skull open. It's a mortal sin. That's serious. And I asked them one more question because I'd like to make this point. Okay? Your parents are going to church on Sunday morning and you fake a tummy ache to stay home because you want to watch television or play video games. And that's a mortal sin because we offend God in a serious way by not going to church. That's why it's the 3rd commandment, not the suggestion. Okay? So that's sanctifying grace. We lose it through a mortal sin, but how do you gain it back? It's not too difficult to gain back. How do you go to confession? Confess the sin and get absolution. Someone is restored to a state of grace. By the way, does anyone know where the sacrament of confession comes from? Does anyone know where this originates? It wasn't some priest or pope who thought that hearing people's sins was a good idea. Does anyone know where we find, where? Not Paul, not Peter, it's actually Jesus Christ. The day he rose from the dead, chapter 20 of John's Gospel, Jesus appeared to his apostles. He breathed on them and said, receive the Holy Spirit. Whose sins you forgive are forgiven them. Whose sins you retain are retained. He gave his apostles, his first priests, the power to forgive sins. That's where the sacrament of penance comes from. So, anyway, you get back to Adam and Eve, because this is before the sacraments. Okay? And God created them. They had sanctifying grace, which was a share in God's life, but it made them friends with God, and it gave them the right to get to heaven. See, if we die in a state of grace, we get to heaven. That's what you need to get to heaven. You die out of a state of grace in a state of unrepentant mortal sin, and you're separated from God for eternity. There's nothing you can do after death. So God desires that everyone be saved. He wants us to die in a state of grace, of course. That's his desire. Well, Adam and Eve were created in a state of sanctifying grace. They were friends with God. They had the right to get to heaven. And when God created them, the original plan of God was that sanctifying grace would be passed on through procreation, through human generation. That their children would have been born and their grandchildren would have been born in a state of grace and a state of friendship with God. That was the plan. But the plan got sidetracked, you could say, because of Adam and Eve. Anyway, besides sanctifying grace, Adam and Eve had great knowledge. They were given knowledge of, many theologians think, all the natural mysteries of the earth. They were given this knowledge by God. They had a much sharper intellect than ours, okay? They had a free will governed by reason. Their intellect and their reason governed their free will, not totally, but their free will was much stronger than ours was. God created them in that fashion. They had happiness in paradise. They would have been there forever had they not sinned. And They were free from, little brackets there. Okay. Luke, you want to read for us? What were they free from?
Pain, suffering, inclination to evil, and death.
Inclination to evil, what is that?
Temptation.
Nope. What is the word next to it? We didn't read it.
Concupiscence.
Concupiscence. Ever hear of that word? Concupiscence? Concupiscence is the inclination to sin. We experience this now. Is it easy to obey all the time? No. When I'm instructing my little second graders to make their first confession, I go through the commandments, especially the fourth commandment, and I say, obeying your mother and father, easy to do, right? And, they smile and they, no, it's not easy to do. Why? We have rebelliousness in us. That's an effective original sin that remains with us after baptism. Okay? And it's called concupiscence. What's the first thing a 2-year-old, terrible two as they say, okay? What's the first thing a 2-year-old learns to say?
No.
No. Why are they saying no? Because of concupiscence. That's why they're saying no, okay? They're not obedient. And our disobedience gets more serious as we go on, okay? So, anyway, this is how Adam and Eve were created. Now, what is that?
Someone tapping again.
Well, I want us to go to the back of the room now. Come on back here. I hung this up when I first started teaching here about 3 years ago. And I want you to look at it. Does anyone know what this is? And where it comes from?
Yes.
Sistine Chapel, that's right. Who painted it? Not Leonardo. Michelangelo, yes. And what is it?
It's God.
God. He creates Adam, okay, that's right. And the old guy with the beard, he symbolizes God the Father, especially. So, what is Michelangelo trying to communicate with this beautiful image that you see? Anyone been to the Sistine Chapel? I've been there. They cleaned up all the artworks. They burned candles in it for hundreds of years, and the Knights of Columbus actually, they funded the whole thing. They had experts come in and they cleaned it all off, so now the colors are much more vibrant. And this is what you see. This is a blow-up of the Sistine Chapel. Obviously, I bought it so I could take it back with me and show it to students like you, okay? So we can discuss it. So you see this, it's not this, it's bigger actually on the ceiling. But what is Michelangelo trying to communicate with that painting?
God created man in his image.
Okay, he did.
How does it work?
Well, actually, this is the mind of God, the Word, okay? The eternal Word, you could say. Perfect knowledge of God reflecting on himself. Okay? But what else in the painting is significant? Anything? To kind of study it. What's going on there? Yes?
We're detached from God.
Well, he isn't touching Adam yet. Okay, he's just about to touch him. He's reaching out to us. Yeah, he wants to reach out. He loves us. He created us out of love. That's part of it. But there's something else in there if you study it. Focus on Adam.
He has no shame.
Well, he's naked. He has no shame now. Yes, that's true. He doesn't have shame, but
His hands.
that's the key. Okay. God is stretching out his finger toward Adam, toward the human race. Okay, and what's Adam doing? Limp wristed. So yeah, okay. You're giving me, sharing your life. Adam didn't really relish, didn't appreciate what God was giving him. This is what Michelangelo was trying to communicate. Because if Adam really did appreciate how much God loved him and shared his life with him, Adam would not have turned away against God and sinned. This is what Michelangelo was trying to communicate by God reaching out to us, but there's the human race, okay? Philippus did, oh well, not reaching back toward God, stretching out toward God as God is stretching out toward us. And even the look in Adam's eyes, not really a loving, vibrant, excited look in Adam's eyes. So, this is, you could say, an indication that Adam is going to sin. Because Adam doesn't appreciate the great gift that God is giving him by creating him and giving him a share in his life. So, let's turn to our seats. And now we're going to study what happened. Okay, that's the second part of the diagram on the right. So, our first parents disobeyed God, thereby lost friendship with God. No longer was the human race in a state of friendship with God. You need to have sanctifying grace to be in a state of friendship with God. They lost sanctifying grace. Okay? They lost the right to get to heaven. See that? Those two things are linked with sanctifying grace. I put a little diagram up there. You can see God, they separated themselves from God, but as a result of that, they separated themselves from each other. We human beings can't live in harmony with others once we're separated from God. Sin separates us from God. Sin separates, that's what it does. Separates us from God and from each other. So they lost sanctifying grace, meaning they lost friendship with God. They lost the right to get to heaven. What happened when the original sin was committed? The gates of heaven were closed. Shut. No one could get there. And no one could open the gates of heaven either. Because Adam and Eve's sin offended the infinitely good God, and no human being could repair the harm done, the offense to God. No human being on his or her own could do that. Only God could repair the break between God and the human race. How did God do that? How did God restore man to friendship with God? How did he repair and make up for Adam's sin and the sins of everyone else? And how did he redeem, buy back from God the share in God's life that Adam and Eve lost? Jesus, okay? Only God could do it. That's why God became man. Because all the bulls and goats and sacrifices of the Old Testament, they couldn't restore the friendship that man had lost with God. They couldn't redeem, buy back a share in God's life that Adam and Eve lost. Only God could do it, and God did it by sending his son. So, Adam and Eve, they lost sanctifying grace, they lost God's friendship, the right to heaven. Now, I've thought about this. Is it fair on God's part that Adam and Eve, because of Adam and Eve's sin, all of us should suffer? All the children born after Adam and Eve should be born out of a state of grace. That's what being born with original sin means. They bequeathed to us original sin. That's on the bottom there, okay? Bequeathing to us original sin and other things. But original sin means we have this kind of stain on our souls when we are conceived and are born, and we don't have a share of God's life. That comes through baptism. That was won for us by Christ. Because he died on the cross, we can be baptized and come into his life. But is it fair that the whole human race should suffer just because Adam and Eve screwed up? What do you think, Luke?
I want to say no, but I'm almost sure the answer is yes.
Well, I want to say no too. It's really not that fair. Just because Adam and Eve sinned, all of us should suffer. But this is how theologians explain it. That there is no right to get to heaven. There's no right that we have to be conceived and born with a share in God's life. God's plan was that people would be conceived and born in a state of grace, a share in his life. Adam and Eve blew it, and they blew it for the whole human race. They're the progenitors of the human race. Everyone descends from them. Did I mention before the genetic evidence for Adam and Eve? Did I mention that before? I think I did. Geneticists today can trace all the women on Earth to, I think, 3 women through the mitochondria. It's a genetic characteristic in all women. Okay? They're thinking that one day they'll be able to trace all the women on Earth to 1 woman, which really supports the idea of Adam and Eve. Right now, I think it's down to 3 women. They trace all women throughout the world to 3 women. And they may be able to, it would be consistent with the Bible if they were able to do it to 1 woman. That's our belief. That's revealed by God. Okay? That the human race descended from Adam and Eve. There's a characteristic in the male, too, and I forget what that is called, but they've narrowed it down to 3 or 4 men that the whole human race is descended from, right? As far as science can determine at this point. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to use an analogy here to help explain why everyone suffers from original sin. Imagine if your parents, or well, not your parents, but you get married, and you go out and buy a lottery ticket, Powerball. I never paid attention to the Powerball. Does anyone ever do that? What's the Powerball now? Like, say $100 million. Okay. Now, say you had 5 kids, 5 children, okay, and you write out a last will and testament, and you leave each of your 5 children $20 million. You want $100 million. You're going to leave them $20 million apiece because you made a few million from investments. Okay. Well, after you write out your last will and testament, you decide with your spouse to take up a vacation in Las Vegas, and you gamble. And you gamble it all away. You can lose $100 million in Las Vegas. If you keep putting money down, they will take it from you. Okay? So on the plane ride back, the plane crashes, and the lawyer calls your children together. Here are the 5 kids. And the lawyer says, well, guess what? You were supposed to get $20 million apiece, but guess what? You get nothing because your parents lost it all. They went to Las Vegas. Okay. So that's kind of what happened with Adam and Eve and us. They were supposed to preserve this life that God gave them, and it was supposed to be passed on, but they blew it. Now, St. Augustine, we've ever heard of St. Augustine? He's one of the great saints. Okay. St. Augustine, in a line that he has, he's very poetic. He speaks of the happy fall of Adam and Eve. Oh, happy fall. The happy fall that won us so great a Redeemer. In other words, because Adam and Eve sinned, God's plan, he was going to send his son, and now we can be restored even to a greater glory than Adam and Eve, in the sense that God gives us grace, and we can strive to live a life like Christ. He will give us graces to help us to do that. Okay? So in the one sense, Adam and Eve blew it, but in God's plan, God sent a Redeemer for us, and we have Jesus Christ as our Redeemer now. In that sense, we're better off than we were originally with Adam and Eve before the fall. Anyway, so to get back to our middle section here, okay, by their original sin, Adam and Eve lost sanctifying grace. They lost God's friendship and the right to heaven. They lost much of their knowledge. Okay. Our intellect is darkened as a result of original sin. We don't see things as clearly as Adam and Eve did. They lost control of the will by reason. Our free will was weakened. Okay. In fact, it'd be good to write on there, intellect darkened, free will weakened. Okay. I usually write that. I have that on this copy. Okay. Okay. Much of their knowledge they lost. Okay. The intellect darkened. In comparison with Adam and Eve, we don't have as sharp an intellect. Okay. Control of the will by reason, free will weakened. Okay. Our free will is weaker than Adam and Eve's was. Okay? And we know that. We struggle to be good, to choose the good. And we sometimes we're misled by things we think are good, and they're not. And we choose bad. They lost happiness in paradise. They're kicked out of the Garden of Eden. That's what happened to Adam and Eve. And who stands guard over the Garden of Eden now? Two cherubim, okay? The second choir of angels, okay? And Adam and Eve also lost freedom from pain, suffering, an inclination to evil, that's concupiscence, and death. What did God warn Adam and Eve when He created them? God said, do not eat of any of the trees of the garden, especially the tree in the middle of the garden, or else you will what? You will die. If you eat of the fruit, that forbidden fruit, you will die. It was a twofold death. Death was not in the original plan of God for Adam and Eve. Most think that after a certain time, God would have just taken people up to heaven after their life on earth. But physical death came from original sin. And spiritual death, meaning they lost sanctifying grace. Original sin was a mortal sin. Very serious. Adam and Eve were free from pain. How do we know that as a result of original sin, pain came? Well, if we read from the Bible, okay, I'm going to open up here to the book of Genesis, chapter 1, and we read in, pardon me, not chapter 1, it's chapter 3, that tells about the fall. God says to the woman, I will intensify the pangs of your childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Childbearing was not supposed to be painful. I understand it is not. I do not have any personal experience of that. I never will. But I'm told by women it is not a painless ordeal to give birth to children. Okay? And also, God speaks to Adam, because you listened to your wife, ate the fruit of the tree which I had forbidden you to eat. Cursed shall be the ground because of you. In toil you shall eat its yield. Thorns and thistles shall it bring forth for you as you eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat your bread. Okay? As a result of the original sin, work became a toil. See, work was not supposed to be boring or a toil or difficult for us, Adam and Eve and their descendants and God's plan would have worked. Work is part of our lot as human beings, okay? But work would have been a joy all the time. Now it's not. Now it is difficult sometimes, it is toilsome, it is aggravating at times, okay? There's a pleasure we get in work, even something difficult. Once you accomplish it, you feel better, right? I can remember mowing the lawn when I was a kid. I didn't have a gas lawnmower, I had a push mower. Does anyone know what those are?
Yeah.
The blades, so I'd have to go out in the summertime and be sweating my head off and mowing the lawn out in front. And while I'm doing it, I'm thinking, oh, this is just torture. But after I'm finished, you look at the lawn, wow, that was good. So there is a sense of accomplishment we can get out of work, even if it's difficult. But it is a toil for us. Okay? There's the whole theology of work. St. John Paul II wrote a beautiful encyclical on work, the meaning of work. Now, because it can be difficult, that means we can offer it up as a sacrifice and make it holy. Like schoolwork. Stuff. Sometimes you enjoy certain subjects, sometimes you may think certain subjects are boring, difficult, toilsome. You can offer these up as a sacrifice. Thereby you sanctify your work, especially if it's difficult. But with Adam and Eve, work would have been just a joy. There would have been no difficulty, no toil in work. The inclination to evil, which is concupiscence, came about as original sin. And that's what Adam and Eve bequeathed to us. That's at the bottom. They bequeathed original sin, except in the case of the Blessed Virgin Mary. She was conceived without sin. That's her Immaculate Conception. Why? Why was she conceived without sin?
So she could be
The mother of God. Jesus is God. God wanted a pure, spotless vessel, so he preserved Mary from sin and filled her with grace. By the way, that is why the angel greets Mary with the words he greets her with. Hail, full of grace. That's a revelation that from the moment of her conception, she was filled with grace. No one else was that said about in Scripture, in any revelation. Okay. So, they bequeath to us ignorance. We have a darkened intellect. They bequeath to us pain, physical pain, suffering. Suffering can be not only physical pain, but can also be spiritual suffering. Adam and Eve wouldn't have had that. The inclination to sin, concupiscence, see that? Okay. And death. We die. Death is part of our lot now. I face death all the time. I mean, about once every week or two, I'm going to the hospital and administering the last sacraments to people who are dying. And it's very real for me, because I see it all the time. It's more difficult when you have a young person die, or even someone relatively young, like Father Reese. He was only 57, just celebrated his 57th birthday. Say before his time. He died really before most would. But I'm going to focus now on the inclination to sin here, okay, which is called concupiscence. It is manifested in 7 ways. And these are the 7 deadly sins. On the bottom there I have an acronym, Places-G. Places-G stands for pride, lust, anger, covetousness, envy, sloth, and gluttony, the 7 deadly sins. They're the doorways to other sins. Pride especially. Every time we sin, it's due to pride. What are we telling God? I'm going to do it my way rather than your way, God. I know better. That's pride. Lust, anger, covetousness, shame. So, we'll end there.